Welcome to the Southern Alberta Climbing History Podcast. Today, we're very pleased to have Daniel Vanderpyle with us. Now, Daniel's another one of the Crow's Nest Pass locals and has been climbing up there for years. So today, we're going to talk to him a little bit about the climbing history in the Crow's Nest Pass area. Also done some other routes. Were you up on the northeast ridge of Chinook?
It had been attempted previously by our friend Nathan Shenton, and I don't remember who he was attempting it with. So I don't know if it had one or two or even more previous attempts, but I know that they tried it, pulled off a big block, didn't like it, and then wrapped it down. And yeah, it never went. So we just kind of, again, went up there just to see if it went. It's a committing day because there's so much hiking, and we 4x4'd in so that we could cut some of the hiking out. But even then, it's an objective that's pretty far out there. Yeah, so it was me and my friend Josh Shue and Clay Getter, and we ended up summiting, and it was awesome. It went at 5 pitches. We put out a little topo on the Facebook group. It's probably lost in there from way back when now. And then it was briefly mentioned in the Alpine Journal that year. But yeah, that was a fun day. Again, going back to the idea of risk management and adventure climbing. That was a fascinating day for me for a few reasons, because I actually, so we did the first pitch, which was 5.7x. It wasn't well protected, but it went. I followed on that pitch. And the second one, you kind of hopped out of this piton belay up onto the actual arête, and you just kind of walked this arête. And it looked like easy climbing, and I was pretty stoked about it. So I took the sharp end on that one and headed up, and I got one marginal piece about 10 feet off the anchor, and then I was about 30 or 40 feet above that. Yeah, there we are. That's Josh and me there. Yeah, so I was probably 30 or 40 feet above my last piece, which is marginal, and it was really easy climbing, but I just didn't like what I saw, and there was a little bit of a lip to step over, like a mid-fifth lip. It's so completely within my capabilities, but I wanted to go home that evening. I wanted to go back to Danica and have dinner with her that evening. I didn't want to push the boundaries too much. And so I actually turned away from that pitch, which the social impacts of that, I'm with my 2 really good friends, and I'm too scared to lead a 5.7 pitch. And so I turned away from it. And then one of my friends felt good about it, and he went and did it, and he sent, and it went, and we got the route. But we had a long discussion afterwards as the 3 of us, like what's acceptable and what's not. And it was kind of this cool thing, because I had support from them because I had reached my limit and I turned away. And Clay, the guy that ended up leading that second pitch, the 5.7x as well, he had my support because he felt it was within his tolerance. And it was just kind of this interesting social dynamic between the 3 of us. But it's important, especially if you are going up a new objective, even if it's with your close climbing partners, to have those intentional conversations, to communicate well, and to not shame people for not sending or going up something, especially if you're adventure climbing, such as trying to get a first ascent on gear up a Chaussee arête. It's not something you want to just push your buddies to send. And so they were really gracious with me. So I had a lot of personal learning that day, because I turned away from a 5.7 pitch in front of my 2 really good friends. But yeah, we sent it. So the first 2 pitches were 5.7x, and then it was like a 5.5, and then a 5.8, and then a 5.3. I redeemed myself. I ended up leading the hard pitch, which is the 4th one, which was probably the funnest one as well. But yeah, we topped out after 5 pitches. I think the topo gives gear suggestions and everything. I can't remember what we brought. I think we had 260 ropes. And yeah, it was a good day. It's such a cool feature to be up on because you got a blank, probably 2,000-foot wall to your left heading to the south. And then you got all those, like another blank wall heading out to the right, to the west with those easy ice climbs that you can get up in the winter. Yeah, there you go. So it was just such a cool feature to be up on. And you're a little offset from the range, so you're looking at the rest of the flathead on either side of you when you're up on the arete. Although most of our route was a little bit to the right of the arete, and we kind of danced on and off the arete as we went up. So yeah, it was a cool day. Committing, I don't want to go up there again. It was chossy, but we had a lot of conversations as we went up, and Clay and Josh are still friends of mine that I regularly talk to, and sometimes we bring up that day and ask, like, would we do that again? Did we make the right choices? And there's room for those discussions, but it was interesting and we learned a lot. And I personally had a lot of learning, like I said, because I turned away from that 5-7 pitch in front of my two friends.
Yeah, it's funny, like when I look back at my climbing, it's never been able to find partners. So like Blair Piggott was one of the few people I was able to climb with and get much. And he started getting trained well enough right when I was switching over to kayaking for a number of years. But it's sort of funny. It's like being out solo a lot, I've learned to get really careful with how I feel on a particular day. And it's almost like this spidey sense. I don't care if it's 5'2", if I'm walking off, or some days a grade 6 ice solo will feel fine. It's like your bomber.
Yeah.
And the people I find that sort of push numbers or say, oh, I'm just going to do it, I'll overcome the fear, and let the group sort of push me ahead, those are the ones I find tend to get injured. The ones that are very almost like that spiritual side to climbing, they're the ones who, tend to live longer.
Yeah. And I briefly mentioned it there. I wanted to go home that day to my wife and have dinner and sleep in bed that night. And so that influences my decision making while out in the field. And like you, I spend a lot of days solo out in the mountains here scrambling. I scramble and hike way more than I climb. At least this last summer I did. And yeah, there's no shame in turning away from a low 5th or even a 3rd or 4th class ridge just because you're not feeling it that day. And yeah, and it's different. If your goal is to project a hard route at Skaha where you're protected well, yeah, push the limits, take wingers if you need to. But when you're on alpine climb, on gear with unknown history of what's above you because you're trying for a first ascent, or at least what you think is a first ascent, the limits that are being pushed, I often found, were mental limits, not physical limits. And so a lot of internal dialogue happens when you're up there, just asking yourself, am I okay with this? Okay, instead of just continuing on, I'm actually just going to stand here for a few seconds, assess my situation, and realize, no, I'm actually going to go down, and today is not the day, and maybe this route is not the route, and that's okay.
See, and that's interesting. Like I purposefully shied away from sport climbing. It was getting popular when I started, like sort of late 90s. And, I never wanted to fall on bolts because I figured if I get used to this, then there's just a small percentage chance that then I'll not have that little back of the mind thing when I'm doing other stuff that I like to do. So I think like for me personally, I think I never pushed the technical limits, but it was a conscious decision of how do I keep the dice from being stacked a little bit against me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting way to look at it. As soon as you said you didn't want to push it on bolts because you didn't want to translate that to gear, first thought of Indian Creek, where you're pretty much sport climbing because the gear is so dependable. So that even itself has some flux in it. Yeah, I think it's important in every climber's or scrambler's career to have turned away from at least a few objectives. If you've never turned away from an objective, that's not a great thing. You should. It's a good thing to have in your resume to know that you've turned away. If a lot of my climbing partners know this story, and I share it freely because I think it's kind of funny. Parrish Mountain, do you know where that is? It's actually right next to Chinook. So I have attempted that mountain 7 times, and I have yet to stand on the top of that mountain. I've been within the peak, probably within 150 meters of the peak on 3 different occasions, and turned away every time. The last time I was up there, I actually had a partner and a rope and a rack, and we were going to make it, but we never did. And after my 7th attempt, I was realizing that there was possibly not, I was worried at the ambition where it was driving me. And so I actually made a personal covenant to myself that I was never going to try Parrish Mountain again. And so every day I am driving in the Crow's Nest Pass down the highway, and I can see all these mountains that I've stood on top of, but Parrish lurks at me every day. But it's there to remind me that life is not just about climbing. For some people it is, and I can respect that. But for me, there's things that are more important than that. My family, my wife, my son, my faith, my community, my family. So yeah, so it's kind of this personal commitment that I had to make to myself, and it bothers me, but it also reminds me every day when I look at Parrish Mountain. It's like, okay, I haven't been on top of that mountain, and that's okay, because life's not just about that. So yeah, decision making in the field is a fascinating topic that I've spent many, many hours thinking about. And yeah, when you translate it to a chassis destination such as the Seven Sisters, it's quite a place to be up there with how heady it is, but it definitely does go. So
yeah, I mean, I was going to say that sort of reminds me of all the old conversations we used to have on Super Topo, and a lot of the climbers saying, oh, how hard it was to give up their entire life to climb. So they were the hardcore lifers and had given up everything, their jobs, families, and other stuff to be committed to climbing. And I was thinking about sort of my history in climbing and kayaking, and you get to a point where, you know, it's really easy just to become the addict. You get addicted to that dopamine in your system from those alpine runouts and other stuff, and then you keep upping it. And I wonder if the hardest thing isn't actually to be balanced, where you have to give up the idea of total commitment to see what your potential is, to lead a balanced life. And I don't know the answer to that, because it's hard both ways, but it just seems like being moderate is the hardest thing to do if you know what you could do otherwise.
Yeah, and sometimes it's rediverting the energy elsewhere, whether it's into a different aspect of climbing or a different destination. So if that puts you into route developing more, or coaching, that's a big one. Putting all the energy and enthusiasm behind the adrenaline rush into, hey, I'm going to expose people to climbing for the first time. That can be just as rewarding as attempting that first ascent line that you're trying to get up, to put somebody into a belay stance and say, this is how you support your friend up a wall. So sometimes it's just rediverting that energy. So,
well, I think we've closed right there with a history piece, and I think this will be a great resource for people making the transition from, say, wall climbing to the outdoors.
cool.
So I think we've added something to the community, Daniel.
Cool.
Yeah. Now, because you know so much about some of these areas, can I pop up like some of the Crow's Nest slabs, like the Knob Hill and the Gargoyle, and you can just walk me through them a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know the names of the climbs really well. I've never.
Oh yeah, who cares about names?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm one of those. All the names are so arbitrary. It just makes me.
I'm just talking about how much I've climbed there, and I still don't know the names of them, or if there are names.
Yeah, I know. Well, that was the thing back in those days is like, I remember showing up to the slabs there, Nob Hill, and no bolts. And then another year there was bolts. And I'm sure you guys were
Oh yeah,
like, oh,
yeah,
what's going on? Did Eric put some up or did the other
yeah,
people?
yeah. I teach our climbing instructor training every spring at Nob Hill, and every year I show up and there's something that's changed from somebody. So it's awesome seeing people contribute to the destination for sure.